again from the garden. If you're new to my channel, I'm Christina. I garden in Northwest Iowa in a zone 5A, and I grow both cut flowers and vegetables. And in the past couple weeks, I have finally been able to get out in the garden and start working on some of my projects for spring. So for this week's video, I thought it would be fun to show you guys what I've been working on and then give you a tour of the garden space and show you where everything will be planted this year. I also finished building a raised no-dig bed last weekend, so I'll show you how I did that too. This will be just the second year that I've planted in this particular garden space. My husband and I have always had a garden at home, and right now we have a 10 by 20 raised bed, and that is where we grow a lot of our vegetables. But this garden space is downtown right next door to my photography studio. When I purchased my building about 5 years ago, I also purchased this empty lot, and I always knew in the back of my mind that I wanted to make it a garden space, and last year just seemed like the right time for that. So we fenced the entire area in. It's about 30 by 50 in size, and last year I grew primarily vegetables in this space, but I did have some cut flowers too, mostly zinnias. And then on the outside of the fence I have a nice large perennial area that I filled about half full last year. Before this space was a garden, this empty lot was completely full of weeds, and so I didn't really know how the soil was going to be. It actually turned out to be really good. When I decided to make it a garden last year, we just tilled everything up, weeds and all. I made my paths and I planted it. I did not do a lot of amending to the soil, and everything grew really well. And I think that's because the ground had been so undisturbed for so long. Originally there was a building on this space, but that was torn down years ago. Last year was a really good learning year on how I wanted my garden to look and what I wanted to grow in it. And so I have a lot of changes in store for this year. Let me show you what some of those are. So the first thing I started working on a couple weeks ago was narrowing all the pathways in my garden. Last year when I laid everything out, I had all of my pathways at 4 foot, and I just realized that I didn't need them that wide and I could use more planting space. So I've been working to make them all 3 foot pathways, and I think it's going to be so much better. I can still easily get a wheelbarrow or a cart down them. So here's a look at what the garden looks like right now, and I just want you to remember what this looks like in 2 months. Right now the garden is probably the ugliest it's going to ever be, but in 2 months it's going to look completely different. So my first planting area is right next to the building that is to the south of my garden, and this is where I had a majority of my cut flowers last year. This was full of zinnias, which it will be this year as well. And then as I pan to the left, over here under the 2 windows that aren't windows anymore, there are 4 hydrangea bushes. But those are still so small that I should be able to plant a lot of cut flowers in front of them. And then next to that, to the left, along the fence, is the small bed where my raspberry and blueberries are. So I am not entirely sure that my blueberries survived the winter, but my raspberry bush definitely did. It has new buds all over it. I also have 1 more blueberry bush coming and 1 more raspberry bush coming for the year. And then around the perimeter of this bed, since I know the raspberry bush is probably going to get a pretty good size, I'm going to put up some sort of staking system to hold it all in place. So this space is in the northwest corner of my garden, and last year this was filled with a few perennials, but mostly flowers from seed. This space is 6 foot deep and about 22 feet long, and this year this will be entirely planted with pro-cut sunflowers. I have a few daisies, some echinacea, and some delphiniums that I'll be transplanting from here out into my perennial bed. And then here you can also see the walkway that I worked on narrowing. This part of the walkway was filled with rock, and so I moved all of that outside the fence also into my parking lot area. So in the opposite corner of my garden from the sunflowers, I have this little nook here by the fence. This is one of the projects that I'm really excited about this year. This is going to be where my pergola is going. I'm putting up a 10 by 10 foot cedar pergola, and there will be a door that goes into that part of the building, which is the back of my studio. And this will just be a little patio area that'll be nice and shaded from the hard sun. And then over to the right here, right next to it, this bed is where all of my dahlias are getting planted. That bed is about 5 feet deep and 18 feet long. So then if I pan to the left from where my pergola will be, That's my lovely air conditioner, which should be blocked by some tall cut flowers this year. This is where my compost bin used to be, but this entire planting area, you can see my landscape block. I have extended it. This will be entirely full of cut flowers this year as well. So then next to that cut flower area are these 2 raised beds that I put up last year, and this is full of strawberry plants that I planted. I got about 100 strawberry roots from my uncle's garden and plugged those in last fall. I honestly do not see a lot coming up yet. I have more coming up at home, but I hope that because we've had a really cold spell of temperatures that they're just a little bit slow coming up this year. And then off to my right in the center of the garden, this is the project that I'm most excited about this year. Now I hope you guys can see it. I hope the shadows aren't too harsh with the sun. But this string that I have run in the garden here, this is where my greenhouse is gonna be. I am so excited. So in this spot will be a 6x10 greenhouse. But as you can see, I've started leveling out the soil already. This part of the garden sloped pretty good, and so I had to add a lot of topsoil and pack it down. And my next project is going to be leveling it out, and then I'm going to put pavers on the perimeter, and that's going to be the foundation for the greenhouse. Next week's weather looks really good, and so I'm hoping by next weekend my greenhouse is fully installed. So my plan is for the layout of this area is to have a little pathway that leads up to the greenhouse with some planters on each side, and then around the greenhouse will be all planted with cut flowers, and then towards the other end of the garden will be vegetables like sweet corn, potatoes, tomatoes, zucchini, and also some trellised vine crops. This is the area last year that filled up with all of my vine crops, but those are going on the outside of the fence this year in my no-dig space. So here's the no-dig space that I built last weekend. I used the Charles Dowding method to create it, and this is where all of my pumpkins are going this year. This is what it looked like to start out with. Basically just a spot that was full of weeds and collected trash. So the first thing I did was I laid down layers of cardboard, and you want to make sure that you cover all of the seams so that no light goes through, because this suppresses all of the weeds. And then since it had just snowed, I tossed a bunch of snow on it. That wetted the cardboard to get things started. And then I covered the cardboard with a mixture of topsoil and compost. I chose compost with manure because pumpkins are such heavy feeders that I wanted them to have plenty of nutrients. This bed is 40 foot long and will give me a lot of additional planting space this year. This is the large bed that I have where all my perennials are planted. They are just starting to come up, and it's only about a half full. So this year I plan to fill it with more perennials and then also plug in some cut flower annuals. I'm just starting to see my perennials pop up. This is some yarrow that started to come up last week. This is kind of hard to see, but this is some Monarda. I have 3 of these bushes planted together. This is some perennial Rudbeckia, and then I have lots of hollyhocks coming up already. Alright, so that's it for this video. I know the garden is really ugly right now, but I just thought it was really important to show what it looks like now versus what it looks like in a couple months and how much it is changing. Between my pergola and my greenhouse, all of my trellised vegetables, and all of the other little changes that I'm doing in the garden, it's going to look so dramatically different. So if you haven't already subscribed to my channel, please do so, and stay tuned over the next couple months to see how everything goes.